Lazarus. Educating, motivating, challenging.
So welcome back to another podcast. My name's Neil Lazarus, and I hope you enjoyed the last one with Mr. Wax. That was really kind of crazy podcast. And what an amazing story. If you didn't listen to the last podcast, we broke some of the secrets of the Jewish community and the work that Manny Wax is doing, revealing pedophiles within the Jewish community there. And really, really great work. It was a privilege to be able to speak to him today. Euan, welcome and thank you for joining us. We have a special guest today who has, if anyone is on Twitter and if anyone is following the Twitter accounts, you will know this gentleman through his Twitter. Or as the Americans say, Twitter. I'm not very fluent on American. The Twitter accounts under the Labour campaign against anti-Semitism. If there's a voice trying to bring the British Labour Party, I know we're going to talk about Britain today. Americans, keep listening. And the problem of rising anti-Semitism. This is the gentleman that's in the know, and this is the gentleman who follows the Twitter accounts. And by the way, if you love this subject, and you're not on Twitter, then you are missing half of the stories. Half of my information coming from the Gaza Strip and elsewhere is on Twitter. So thank you for joining us. And I hope the weather isn't too bad as bad as the politics is in Britain right now.
Yeah, it's pretty disgusting. It's pretty revolting weather, and the politics isn't much better either, I'm afraid.
So hold on. If I know that I was speaking to a northerner, then that would have been something else. That puts a whole new light on stuff. The Americans are so not going to get this conversation, but it doesn't matter. Well, the 3 Brits listening will probably get it. No, but seriously speaking, let me play devil's advocate for a second. What would you say to those people who are saying, look, the campaign against Corbyn and his government, or his, as leader of the opposition, is basically a campaign to delegitimize the leadership of the opposition. And the smear is the easiest way to go about. How would you respond to that?
Well, I mean, it's a lot of work. It's taken a lot of work, and it takes up a lot of my time. So I'd certainly say that if it was a smear, it's certainly not the easy way to go about it. And actually, we've really had to work really hard to bring this issue to the forefront of the British media and to make it a key part of the political discourse in the Labour Party and elsewhere.
Yeah, but the fact that it is hard work doesn't mean that it's not a political smear. I mean, the Daily Mail, those of you in the States, which is a very conservative newspaper, must love you.
Well, yeah, I mean, we have worked quite closely with the Daily Mail. They've got a journalist who works for them who's been very committed to bringing this story out. But there's an old sort of George Orwell quote, which is that just because it's printed in the Daily Mail doesn't mean it isn't true. And I think that's certainly the case with Labour anti-Semitism. It's not a smear if it's true. And the fact is that we have put together a massive body of evidence that shows that there's an institutional issue with anti-Semitism in the Labour Party that really comes from the head of the body downwards. So Jeremy Corbyn has always been very much on the fringes of the radical political discourse in the UK. Alongside that, as well as many of his fellow travellers on the hard left.
But now you are sounding like the Daily Mail. I mean, I don't think anyone would be. You've got to have read the Daily Mail to get the sarcasm about it. I think everyone has just switched off from the States. But the reality is, you haven't convinced me. I'm sorry. Is the fact I'm saying it's a smear campaign? Corbyn is coming from the far left. I don't think anyone would disagree that he comes from the far left. I don't think anyone would disagree that he comes from a pretty radical critique of Israel and even the right of Israel to exist. Doesn't make him anti-Semite.
I think a belief that the state of Israel shouldn't exist is pretty anti-Semitic. Some of the statements that he's made, some of the comments he's made, he delegitimized British Zionists in a speech in 2013. He said that British Zionists didn't understand irony and they needed to be taught a history lesson. I think that, that's not painting a swastika on someone's forehead or marching up and down, but it's indicative of an anti-Semitic frame of mind. He's also talked about military actions in Egypt, which were the hand of Israel were behind them. He took part in an event on Holocaust Memorial Day that compared Gaza to Auschwitz. He's got a track record throughout his career of supporting Hezbollah, of supporting Hamas. Describing them as good as models for social justice.
If I can interrupt you for 1 second, that still doesn't mean he's anti-Semitic. It means he's seriously anti-Israel. I mean, the fact that he supports Hezbollah, the fact that he's out there calling for the end of occupation, doesn't necessarily call himself, would definitely not call himself a Zionist. Aren't you confusing Zionism with anti-Semitism?
I don't think so. I don't think we are. I think if you define Zionism in its purest form as the desire of the Jewish people to have their own country, what we're talking about here is anti-Zionism, which is merely a political expression of anti-Semitism. It delegitimizes, it demonizes the state of Israel. It substitutes Israel for Jews and Israelis for Jews. It frequently uses Zionism and attacks on Israel as a sort of metaphor for attacking Jews in the UK as well. And it frequently holds British Jews as accountable for what happens in Israel as well. And that's where this whole sort of atmosphere and environment of left-wing anti-Semitism is really sort of coming from, and it's why it's sort of spreading so quickly across the left in the UK.
But hold on, let's say I'm a member of the Labour Party. I'm critical of the Israeli occupation in the West Bank. I'm critical of Israeli policy in Gaza. How can I be critical but not anti-Semitic?
Well, you can be critical. Of course, you can be critical of Israeli policy. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that, and it's perfectly legitimate. And if you are engaging in good faith and you are presenting a critique of the policies of Netanyahu and his government and looking at Gaza and providing a rational and an accurate portrayal about the problems there, then that's absolutely fine. But if you start saying that what is happening in Gaza is similar to what happened in the Second World War, if you describe the occupation of the West Bank as similar to Nazi occupation, then that is a process which is revealing of anti-Semitism.
So you're saying
it's not necessarily
the problem you have is the comparison basically of Israel with Nazi Germany. So that's going beyond the red line, if you like. What would your red lines be?
Well, I don't have red lines. I'm not Jewish myself. I don't think it's necessarily appropriate for me to be someone who acts as a policeman or over what is or what isn't anti-Semitism. That's why the adoption of the IHRA working definition of anti-Semitism last year by the Labour Party was so important. It was a document which was resisted by Jeremy Corbyn throughout the summer, caused a huge amount of controversy. It was finally adopted in September, but as we're seeing this week, none of hasn't been adopted within the actual structures of the Labour Party and hasn't been used to sort of identify where Labour members are expressing anti-Semitic views, anti-Semitic opinions, sharing anti-Semitic images. But that is really the document that we at Labour Against Anti-Semitism have always said that the Labour Party should be using to apply to cases of anti-Semitism. But it's not. It's just not at all.
For those of our listeners and viewers who are not familiar with that document, could you just briefly outline how does it describe what anti-Semitism is?
Okay, I mean it's not a massively long document. My understanding is it's evolved out of a number of ongoing sort of academic and sort of other stakeholder attempts to really sort of try and understand what anti-Semitism is, especially contemporary anti-Semitism. Obviously, it's a long time since the Second World War, and I think a lot of our conceptions about what anti-Semitism is are still bound, sort of in what happened in the 1930s and the 1940s. It starts with a sort of précis or executive statement of anti-Semitism, but it then adds sort of nuance and depth to that initial sort of definition by presenting examples of how contemporary anti-Semitism can manifest itself. And I think what it aims to do is to help people understand whether something is or isn't anti-Semitic. And it's not necessarily a hard and fast rule. You need to take things in context. Obviously, of course you do. You have to do that with any kind of discrimination. But it is what the Jewish community in the UK especially have asked the Labour Party and the government and the CPS and the police service to adopt. And actually Labour pushed back on that, and they said that they weren't going to adopt that they knew better than the Jewish community about what anti-Semitism was, and they were going to adopt their own code of conduct, their own code of anti-Semitism. And they failed, and the IHRA was adopted. But as we've seen this week, it's not being utilised within the Labour Party to expel racist members, which is unsurprising, because if they did adopt it and they did implement it, one of the people they'd have to expel would be the leader. Is
something like BDS anti-Semitic in your opinion?
Yes, I think it is. I think anything which singles out Israel as a unique evil in global politics, that seeks to delegitimize Israel when other countries are more deserving of a BDS campaign. I think really is a sort of revealing of an anti-Semitic mindset. There's been a lot of coverage this week of sort of groups on the left trying to get Israel to try to cancel their hosting of the Eurovision Song Contest. Well, there was no similar campaign a couple of years ago when it was in Azerbaijan or when the Winter Olympics were in Russia. But they have far worse human rights abuses there than Israel. They're far more aggressive in terms of prosecuting foreign wars and advancing their imperialist endeavours. Yeah, they have not been. They're not targeted for BDS.
I understand what you're saying as far as this. Sorry, I understand what you're saying as far as this double standard is concerned on the left, where they would pick, Israel rather than Russia, for example, that you gave. But is that really anti-Semitism? In other words, my feeling is I'm not sure, that's why I raised the question. I know that there's your left-wing perception of the victim, of the oppressed, is certainly given towards the Palestinians. Is that double standard, which I agree with, it's also at the United Nations, is that anti-Semitism or is that just a double standard?
Sorry, could you
is the double the question? Yeah, is the double standard that you talk about, where people will not campaign against human rights in Russia, in Turkey, in Syria, etc., but only Israel, is that just a double standard, or is it really anti-Semitic?
Well, I think the double standard is anti-Semitic. I think the hypocrisy is anti-Semitic. I think the hypocrisy of a group of people who support the Maduro regime in Venezuela, who are happy to support what's happening in Iran, but then jump on the only Jewish country in the world and accuse it of being an apartheid state. I think that is anti-Semitic. I think that is it's not someone with a swastika on their arm goose-stepping around the town square, but it's representative of an anti-Semitic mindset that is looking to delegitimize Israel, to demonize Israel, and is really sort of a way that anti-Semitism is expressed by people on the left, because they also understand that what is projected onto Israel is also projected onto the Jewish community in the UK as well. And it forces Jews in the UK to come out and define themselves as being pro-Israel or anti-Israel. It's a type of assertion of dominance that again seeks to put British Jews into a pen, into a ghetto. It's what David Hirsch describes as sort of being within or without the community of the good, and really sort of compels people, Jews, especially on the left, to sort of okay, well you want to be with us on the left. Well, then we expect you to criticise Israel. We expect you to show solidarity with the Palestinian cause. If you don't do that, then you're suspect. You are not to be trusted. You are anti-Semitic trope.
What would you say to someone who says, look, I've been fighting racism all my life in the Labour Party. I've been dedicated to it, and because of my battle against discrimination, it's led me to oppose, the segregated roads in Israel, dual justice system, and Jewish nation-state law, and that's why I'm against Israel.
I think that's probably legitimate. That's what goes into the areas of legitimate criticism of Israel and legitimate criticism of Israeli policy, and that's perfectly understandable. I'd question why someone in the UK is fixated on Israel. In the UK we have people who are fixated on immigration, and they will say, it's not racist to talk about immigration. And you're like, well, yeah, okay, it's not racist to talk about immigration, but when you only talk about immigration, then it kind of indicates that maybe that's something. There's something a little bit racist about that.
Right.
That's my own personal perspective. Is that I'm always a little bit suspicious of people in the UK who faced with a world full of human rights abuses and disparities and inequalities. The one hill that they choose to die on is the Palestinian-Israel standoff conflict, whatever.
I knew the reverse. You said you're not Jewish, but you're fixating on Israel, but supporting it.
Well,
you said you're not Jewish, so what got you into it?
Well, to be honest, I don't really care how much about Israel. To be honest, only in the fact that in the course of my concern over anti-Semitism, I've spoken with I'm part of an organisation which is a mixture of Jewish and non-Jewish members, predominantly Jewish. So obviously, got their sort of whether I wanted to or not, got their opinions about the situation there, and it becomes almost impossible to discuss anti-Semitism in the Labour Party and on the left without giving some thought to Israel, because so much of it is caught up in representations of that conflict in the UK and on the left. I said I've never even been, and I think I know the names of the two main parties. But I am wary of being drawn too much into debate about Israel, because people on the left who wish to try and deflect from discussions of anti-Semitism and wish to minimise it will say, well, Jeremy Corbyn's just pro-Palestinian, and it's like, no, he's using his pro-Palestinianism as a way to channel his anti-Semitism. And that's where you get drawn into these discussions about Israel and Palestine. But the fact is that we are talking about people who are promoting anti-Semitic ideas, promoting anti-Semitic views, who are getting, sort of...
Wait one second. Go back to what you said. Repeat your last sentence.
So we're getting people who are promoting anti-Semitic views, who are taking images, anti-Semitic cartoons and images, which are coming from far right websites in the US, and they're popping up all over the place on social media groups, on Facebook and things like that. And those are the things which we're reporting, and the response is, oh no, you're just responding on people who are anti-Israel, pro-Palestinian, and it's and nod, wink, wink. We all detect the hand of Israel behind this,
right?
Which is completely untrue. But it's part of the process of trying to present this issue, present this crisis as a as something which is a serious issue of racism. It's not just some kind of academic discussion about racial discourse in the UK. It's real. It's real hatred. It's coursing through the veins of the Labour Party. The Labour leader is complicit, is leading it, is doing nothing to tackle it, and it's being enabled and facilitated by other leading figures within the party.
So
and now it's going out their membership as well, because their loyalty means that they feel that they're compelled to defend the leaders' positions on these things, defend the anti-Semitism which is coming out of the party. And so now we've got a membership of 500,000 people. Maybe like 3 years ago, most of those didn't care about Palestinian-Israel conflict, or if they did, they didn't really think about it too much. But now, because of the way that it's become manifest in the party, now people are having to think about it more and more, and it's sort of triggering latent anti-Semitism within the Labour Party membership, which exists in society as a whole.
Should Jews leave the Labour Party?
I think it's a personal choice. I'm still a member of the Labour Party. I don't want to have to give up my membership. I'd rather they try to take it away from me. And I obviously I fully support the right of Jews to remain in the party. We have a very rigid two-party system in the UK. It's basically you've got Party A, Party B. One of them is called the Conservatives. The other one's called the Labour Party. One of those two is going to win an election, and you can't. It's extremely bad for democracy to say, well, the Labour Party's dead, let's vote for the Conservative Party the whole time, because in 15 years we're going to have a party that's been in place for generations and is slowly decaying, etc., etc. So I do understand the desire, and I have a bit of heart invested in this as well, that there is a way that the Labour Party will be saved, that at some point the unions will come in and the PLP will get together with the unions and they'll sort of say to the leadership, enough is enough. We've had enough. This is it. The party is dying. It's institutionally racist. We're going to get smashed in the next however many elections. We've got to sort this out. It's a very, very.
Do you think that that's really the issue? Do you think that people not vote Labour because it's seen as racist? Do you have research on that?
I haven't done any research on that. I mean, we haven't got any money. I mean, we're a volunteer-led organisation. We haven't even got a website, unfortunately. I think it will affect voting. I think we're actually in a broader political crisis at the moment in the UK. We've got two parties who are both pretty much unelectable, who are both really incompetent in terms of being either a working government or a viable opposition, and whether that facilitates whether that leads to the creation of a new party. There's a massive sense of ground which isn't being catered to at the moment by either of the two parties. There's fears about what's happened to other parties when they've tried to come in, but we're going to see what happens with that. But at the moment, the political system in the UK is just an absolute disaster area.
It reminds me of the last scenes of the Titanic. It's like this once great ship in the Atlantic sinking slowly. Everyone's in denial except for the working classes.
Yes.
Finally, if people want to be in contact with you, donate to you. You said everything's voluntary to help the campaign to fight anti-Semitism in the British Labour Party. Where do they turn? So
if you go onto Twitter and follow our Twitter feed, that's Labour Against AS on Twitter. We'll follow you back. Send us a tweet. or we have a Facebook page, Labour Against Anti-Semitism. Find that on Facebook. If you have a look on our Twitter feed, then we have a newsletter service. Sign up to that and carry on getting information. Hopefully soon we will be getting a website. But we're not quite there at the moment. I mean, we've only been going for 2 years. One thing at a time.
So if people want to help with your campaign, we very much recommend you make contact via Twitter. Maybe someone will help set up your website for you, volunteer their services, to join your demonstrations. Thank you very much for joining us, and it will be a pleasure. Keep in touch.
Thanks, Neil. Good to speak with you.
It's always a pleasure. Thank you. And hopefully we'll see you in Israel soon sometime.
Oh, I'd love it. It's too cold here.
We got the Eurovision Song Contest. You have to come.
Absolutely.
All right. Thank you. Appreciate it. I'm going to end right now. So thanks a lot.
Good stuff. Cheers, Neil.
Good, man.
Nice speaking with you.
And I'll send you.
Bye. Cheers. Bye.
You're listening to Middle East expert and keynote speaker Neil Lazarus, live from Jerusalem.